All right, thank you. Bye-bye. That was Elroy, he said that they didn't. Oh, are we ready? Sorry.
1 o'clock.
Sorry.
Till the mayor hits the gavel,
Let's go.
it's all game.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the City of Chester Public Safety Committee meeting, where we do have a presentation today by our Commissioner of Fire, VP Shirley. Let's just start with roll call. Madam Clerk.
You just announced that they're here, that your committee is here.
Oh, okay. The committee is here. Looking left and right, we're all here. Get a motion to approve minutes that are before us and have been emailed earlier. I think we all received them.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And there's no opposed. That motion carries. Thank you. Public comments on the agenda items only with no public. I don't think that's going to occur. So let's jump right into it. Public Safety Committee will discuss Article 123, Fire Department of the City Codified Ordinances. Commissioner Shirley has provided us with the current ordinance, his proposed ordinance, and some detail on each ordinance that he's looking to, or recommending be altered. I don't see anything being added and those to be deleted, so the floor is yours. We all have those documents? So one's a single sheet, one's two sheets, and the other is the original. I always love these originals because you can tell they were done on a typewriter.
Good afternoon, Mayor Roots, Councilwoman West, Councilman Davis. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. We're going to be discussing Article 123, as Mayor said, about the fire department. The current article was last addressed in 1956. The very first section, Section 01, Organization and Components, it still has all 5 of the volunteer fire companies listed as the fire department for the city of Chester. Obviously, this article is in need of revision. We can go through each one of the sections. I have explained, or I should say I have written out in the one sheet, broken it down section by section, basically why it needs to be revised. But obviously the section 1, which is the organization components, the 5 volunteer fire departments have not responded in the city since the late 1980s. The fire department is now a career, fully staffed, 24/7, 365 department with city employees. So that's pretty straightforward right there. In terms of section 2, which is the,
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
Just for clarity's sake, since 61, the city has employed paid firefighters, but I guess this assumes that the volunteer firefighters were still in place even as the city employed firefighters, or did the city employ firefighters to work along with volunteers, which wouldn't make sense at all? So were there like 6
So,
5 volunteers in the city force between 61 and 80 in the 80s? That's
yes, so we'll rewind a little bit, and I believe it was either the late 1800s or early 1900s, the city paid employees to staff the volunteer fire stations as drivers. In the, I believe it was 61 or 62, is at that time they were looked at as not city employees. They were, I think the arrangement was actually the city paid the firehouses, and then the firehouses paid the volunteers, paid the employees. In the 60s,
So these were paid volunteers.
Yes and no. They were employees of the volunteer fire companies. So they were, in essence, paid firefighters. They weren't volunteers. But in the 60s, and I apologize, I'm not 100% on the history, but this is my understanding of it, is that in the 60s, the paid firefighters went to court basically saying, hey, look, we're not employees of the firehouse. We're actually employees of the city. And that's when the IAF at Local 1400 was formed. And it was recognized that, yes, you're not volunteer employees, you're employees of the city of Chester. At that point, though, all 5 firehouses within the city were still volunteer organizations, and they operated up until the 80s. It wasn't until 1978 that the first city fire station was built, which is Station 1 at 3rd and Tillman. And that was built as a direct result of a fire where there were multiple fatalities of children. And there was an outcry from the public that the public demanded a city fire station be built. And the second one was built in 1984 up on 14th Street. And then slowly throughout that time, the volunteer firehouses closed. And that's where we're at today is there's, and again, it was the late 1980s when the last volunteers actually responded on calls.
So this is all for historical sake. I'm just curious, when the Station 1 opened in 1978, it was staffed with whom?
It was staffed with city firefighters.
So people were hired to fill that fire station, is that what you're saying?
Yes. And I want to say it was sometime in the 60s that it was recognized that the firefighters that were being paid were city employees. So that we've had paid firefighters since the 60s that weren't volunteers. It's just they never had fire stations, the city fire stations that were owned by the city. They just operated in the volunteer firehouses. And then in 78, they moved some of the city firefighters to the city station.
What about the one on Concord Road? There was a fire station there.
Mm-hmm.
So when did that come into play?
So that was one of the 5 volunteer fire companies.
Mhm.
And then when basically, as the fire companies disbanded and closed, again, they were owned by those volunteer organizations, and those volunteer organizations sold them. So that one is now a mosque. There's another fire station right over on 9th and Potter that there's a trash recycling outfit that works out of there. So one of the volunteer firehouses down on 3rd Street, I think, is another mosque. There's that's not,
No, it's privately owned.
it's privately owned. Okay, there's another fire station on Highland Avenue that's a garage. It's privately owned. So yeah, just as the volunteer companies closed, they just sold off their assets.
Okay.
All right. Oh, no problem. So again, that's just section number 1. Obviously, we don't have any more volunteer fire departments here. Section 2 talks about the qualifications, terms, and vacancies of the officers of those volunteer fire companies. Again, it doesn't really apply because we don't have volunteer companies. And in terms of, because we fall under 3rd class city code with civil service, the officers of the fire department are determined by civil service rules and regulations, and then also that of the collective bargaining agreement. So the captains and the battalion chiefs, that's done through a testing process, and that's how we get our officers. Section 3 talks about the police status of officers. It just talks about they shall be ex officio members of the police force. I don't know where that came from, but anytime we would need any type of police powers, we're going to work in conjunction with the police department. We're not going to act as police officers on our own. Talking about section 4 is, oh, okay,
And let's go back to section 123.03.
okay,
That's what we're talking about, right?
yes.
How, something's not matching up here.
I think what it is, I had a blank page, and then on 27 starts 123.03. find this. These are the replacements.
I'm just gonna, I prepared, I
didn't know- I didn't realize
I guess the Crawford has additional sections.
We got
Right,
2303.
Yep.
And then in your new void,
well,
how
Yeah.
does this 12303 match up with that, or?
it doesn't match up, and
Okay.
I would just like to go through the old one first, discuss it.
Okay.
and then
Okay.
we'll talk about that.
Okay.
We'll talk about the new one.
All right,
All right.
so that's what I was having that.
Okay, yeah, now
We're
that,
eliminating some stuff, they're gonna roll up.
Yes.
Eliminating numbers.
Exactly.
being replaced with new. Okay.
yep, yeah. So, we're good on section 3, though, with the police status of the officers of the fire department?
All right,
Yeah.
so we should be looking at the existing ordinance.
Yes, we're just looking at the current ordinance.
Okay.
We'll discuss the proposed
Gotcha.
after we go through this. All right, so again, if the fire department needs police officers, we have a trained and certified police force. We're going to be using them for any type of law enforcement actions. Proceeding against officers or companies, again, this just goes back to the volunteers, during the heyday of the volunteers, if you had an issue with an officer or a volunteer company misbehaving, this was the process to deal with that. And again, it just doesn't apply. We're a career organization, we're city employees, we have a human resources department, we have rules and regulations that we need to follow. There's a city, handbook, we have the collective bargaining agreement. All of that's covered under there, so this is just really, I don't want to say oblivious, but outdated.
Yep.
The duties of the chief, investigations and reports, this just talks about the chief of the fire department, which we will talk about in the proposed ordinance, and just describes his duties, as well as to investigate fires. We actually have firefighters that are trained and certified in investigation, but they are a part of the fire marshal's office within the fire department. We'll discuss that in further detail with the proposed ordinance. Moving right along, duties generally of assistant chiefs, that's addressed in the new ordinance, as well as in the collective bargaining agreements and the rules and regulations of the fire department. Eligibility for membership. Again, if you wanted to be a volunteer, this is what how you were eligible for membership in a volunteer organization. We're career staff. We do, through civil service, we do testing, and hiring is based off of that testing. So there's really no need to have, membership for volunteer companies. Same thing with badges and memberships lists. If you belong to a fire company, you had to be on a list. You got a badge from that volunteer company, showed that you were associated with it. And again, we're city employees, mayor, you do the swearing in, they all get their badges from the fire department. It's a pretty interesting one, intoxicating liquors in firehouses or at fires. Volunteer firehouses were also social clubs. They'd have halls that, people could rent out. And in those halls, they had bars. And it wasn't uncommon back in the day that, the firefighters would hang out at the fire station and have a couple beers. And this just talks about, not allowing to drink in the firehouses or, at a fire. Again, we're all city employees. As much as sometimes, the job does drive us to drink, obviously we can't do that on duty or, in the stations. And again, we have rules and regulations in place for that. Use of apparatus and personnel. Again, outside the city, we have mutual aid agreements in place with the surrounding municipalities. Trials and tests, these were kind of competitions between the two volunteer firehouses, which engine, could, pump more water. So obviously we don't do those kind of things anymore. Discontinued companies, just talks about the council shall have the power to take charge of all apparatus and other property belonging to the city. Whenever the volunteer companies did disband, I'm assuming that was done. I don't know, but volunteer companies are organizations. They're basically private organizations, 503Cs. They receive money from the state. That all has to be accounted for, but any money that's, theirs was theirs and it's distributed. I forget how it's distributed, but yeah, this basically just talks about if a volunteer company ceased to be, making sure the city got its, whatever they invested into it back. Moving right along, the use of public fire hydrants. This is a law. Let's see where it's at. It's covered under Title 18 of, the state statutes that, basically no one's allowed to use fire hydrants without the authorization of the water authority or the company having jurisdiction. And again, technically, we're not even supposed to use the fire hydrants for anything other than a fire. And anytime we do, we actually call the water company.
In the event of the fire, though, we don't have to clear it first.
No. Yeah, they're there for your immediate response. And I mean, we'll use them, but if it's something significant, like for training, we'll use them. But if it's something significant, we'll always call them up because they do belong to the Chester Water Authority. Control of fire department at fires, fire lines. This is all covered in the 2018 International Fire Code. Basically just says that, the chief of the fire department and the fire department basically have authority at fire scenes to do what they need to do to bring the situation under control. Members' misconduct at fires, expulsion, and appeal. Again, that just deals with volunteer members. If, again, they were volunteers, they were employees, if they showed up to a fire and you told them, hey, go connect that hose to the truck, and they're like, nah, I don't want to do it. The recourse was that, the member could be suspended or maybe, ejected from the company. Again, we have, Okay. Yeah, it's just there's, yeah, so.
Two sections, disposition of foreign fire
Insurance funds. That is covered under our fire escrow ordinances. So I think it's titles 1507 or articles 1507 and 1509. That's all covered under there. So I mean, you can see this is from 1956. None of it really applies. It's just all kind of outdated.
Someone did ask, in light of what happened out in California with fire hydrants not having water in them, are the Chester fire hydrants charged?
They are.
And how do we know that?
Well, the reason we know that is because the fire hydrants operate off of the same water main system that residential water supply operates off of. So if there was a loss of water in the fire hydrants, there would be a loss of water in different sections of this city. They are, they're what's considered, I don't want to get too far in it to confuse people, but they're considered dry hydrants for the fact that due to the 9-degree weather outside, if we had water in the hydrant, it would freeze and break the hydrant. So the water is actually below the frost line, and that's why we actually have to turn the hydrant on to allow the water to come up. But again, it's also maintained by the Chester Water Authority. They go around yearly and they check the flow of all the fire hydrants to make sure it's producing the appropriate gallons per minute that it's designed to do. And any fire hydrants that are taken out of service, the Chester Water Authority advises us, and then we know just based on a map of, hey, this hydrant's not working, that hydrant's not working. But no, we would basically have to probably suck the Delaware River dry in order for us to run out of water.
Is it common to use treated water for fires?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And not only that, we also have the ability, if there was ever some type of natural disaster here where our water grid would be affected, we can call in fire boats and actually connect hoses to fire boats and pump water inland if we need to do that. If we have to do that, it's probably going to be a very bad day. So, but there are backup plans. So the new Article 123 that I am proposing is just 4 sections. The first section is just the organization of the fire department. It'll be headed by a fire chief, and that fire chief, who is appointed by mayor and council, will ensure that the fire department is staffed, organized in such a manner to provide the required services for the protections of person and property in the city of Chester against fires, hazardous materials, technical rescue, and natural human-made disasters. And again, kind of what I've talked to you guys about before, fire departments are no longer just fighting fires. We are an all hazards department. Any type of emergency other than, you know, a police law enforcement emergency, the fire department is going to be involved in it. The fire chief shall meet, so section 2, the fire chief shall meet all the requirements as outlined by the job description, Department of Human Resources. Previously, all of the previous fire commissioners have worked their way up through the ranks in the fire department. But there may come a certain point in time that you as mayor and council may want to look to say, hey, you know what, there's someone else from outside of the fire department, or maybe from another fire department, from another municipality, that, you know, you guys say, hey, this is the person we want to lead our department, much like Philadelphia did with the previous fire commissioner, Adam Teal. He came from the Virginia area, and they brought him up, and he did a lot of great things for the fire department. But that being said, we've developed a job description for a fire chief that meets some pretty high standards. So it's, hey, whoever you guys are going to be, you know, looking to put in place, that person meets certain requirements, that they have a minimum. It's just not just, you know, Joe Schmo off the street. And Section B of, or Part B of Section 2 is directly out of third-class city code. So basically, the fire chief shall be appointed, again, by the mayor with the approval and consent of council. And that's what you guys do now. But it's just, we're memorializing it in this new article. And again, talking about Title 11 of the city, as well as Article 1501, which is our fire code, which is the 2018 IFC. The fire chief also serves as the fire marshal. And while I'm technically the fire marshal, there's also members of the fire department that are in the fire marshal's office that are also my designees. So they'll actually go out and do the inspections, do the investigations, things of that nature.
Commissioner, quick question. How many
Yes, sir.
officers do we have that are technically qualified to be or certified to be a fire marshal?
We have 3 that are certified, well, 4, including myself. We have 4 that are certified to be fire marshals and 2 to be investigators. You're welcome. Moving along, the emergency management coordinator. Every municipality needs to have an emergency management coordinator. That job has always fallen on the fire commissioner, and this just, again, is memorializing that the fire chief shall serve as the emergency management coordinator. And Section E, again, comes from third-class city code, is the fire chief, if they come out of the bargaining unit, basically the fire chief receives the same contract, if you will, that the firefighter unions have. The deputy fire chief.
Let's go back to D.
Sure.
I know part of our budgeting process, there was a request for an emergency management person.
Yes.
Wouldn't have been the coordinator, that was another title?
Yes, that's emergency management specialist, and you can appoint a emergency management coordinator full-time for the city of Chester and other third-class cities in the Commonwealth. It's not common, just because someone who is certified to the level to be an emergency management coordinator is going to command a pretty hefty salary, whereas your emergency management specialists, their salary is more in line of the work that needs to get done, the clerical work, the day-to-day kind of things.
All right,
You're welcome.
In the past, the fire chief, yourself, was always the emergency management person. When in a state of an emergency, then you would take over as the emergency manager.
Yes, and we still want to leave it that way. I would still remain the emergency management coordinator, and whoever fills my shoes when I leave would become the emergency management coordinator. But the day-to-day operations, the day-to-day clerical work, if you will, that needs to get done with, making sure phone numbers are correct in the emergency operations plan, all the points of contact with the local businesses, making sure all their emergency plans are up to date, that falls under an emergency management specialist. So they would report to the emergency management coordinator, but the emergency management coordinator, and I guess just because I'm sitting in the room right here, so, mayor leads the city, but some of his day-to-day stuff is handled by Justin. So I'm just looking for my Justin. So.
I always thought the administrative assistant handled that. The points of contact. In the past, that's how it's been.
She does help with that, but the emergency management is especially with a municipality the size of the city of Chester, is a job into and of itself. And she can update phone numbers and things of that nature, but when it actually comes to the types of plans that need to be in place with the municipalities, or I'm sorry, the local businesses and stuff like that, it's how do I say that? It's a lot more involved than what the administrative assistant would be handling.
I see.
Okay. Any other questions with the Section 2, the fire chief position?
Nope.
So moving on to Section 3, the deputy fire chief. This would be appointed by the fire chief as needed, and the same thing, the deputy fire chief would have to meet the job descriptions as outlined in the city of human resources. So it just can't be the fire chief is, picking his buddy just because, they were best friends growing up. It has to be someone who's, trained and certified to be the deputy fire chief.
All right, so you're going to stop right there.
Okay.
Tell me why. Why would you want to include this? I guess number one, the deputy fire chief. That doesn't exist right now.
It does.
It does.
Yes, it
So
does.
how does the fire chief appoint that person?
Yes.
Is it as described in Section A currently? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Yes. The only difference is that with the deputy chief that was just hired, or I should say is serving under me, that was hired, there was a interview process. There was 2 rounds of interview. I think, I know, Mayor, you sat in on the second round of the interview. Realistically, my belief is that the fire chief should be choosing who his deputy chief is, and it should be his sole decision, his or her sole decision, because they're going to know who they work best with, who they think is best suited for the job. But that being said, it also just can't be their best friend. They have to meet the certain requirements in order to fulfill that position. I don't think if we were to leave it to let people apply and then there's an interview panel and the interview panel says, well, we think candidate A is the best, and the deputy or the fire chief says, like, I have a personal history and I can't work with this person, you're kind of setting the administration up for failure, because you could have someone working underneath you that could be undermining them. I don't know, but I always just think that if you're going to, and it's probably the same as you, Mayor, when you, or not that you're undermining them, but when you decide who your deputy mayor is going to be, you're going to pick the most qualified, best candidate for the position. Even though you have the option to pick whoever you want, it's your decision and your decision alone. That's the best way that I can make the analogy as to why I believe the fire chief should have the sole discretion in who he appoints as his or her number 2.
It's not quite apples to apples,
Okay.
but
So the last process was right after Commissioner Rigby left. We had looked at, and I should, there really was never a process in place before. It was always just, the fire commissioner would always recommend who they thought, should be the next fire commissioner. And for as long as I've been with the department, there was never a deputy chief. There was always just the fire commissioner. Under Commissioner Travis Thomas's term as a commissioner, Bill Rigby was appointed as the deputy, and my understanding was, and that was in 2015, my understanding was that Rigby was appointed as a deputy because at the time he was the vice president of the union, and the city was having so many problems with grievances that they made Rigby the deputy so that things could start flowing without grievances. When Commissioner Thomas left, Rigby moved up, and he didn't take a deputy for up until right before he left, and that's when I came into the role. So there's typically never been a deputy fire chief. The process for Commissioner Rigby, when he selected me, it was his decision. He said, "Hey, I think John Paul Shirley should be the deputy chief. This is everything he's done. Here's his resume," and he discussed it with to my understanding, mayor and council. With my deputy chief right now, Deputy Chief McBreen, when Commissioner Rigby, as he was leaving, approached, I believe, mayor and council at the time and just said, "Hey, look, Shirley should have a deputy. We think this is the best person for the job." There was some other people who were interested, and it was decided that there should be some type of interview process so that the other people who were interested in the position could say, "Hey, this is, or just, an interview process." So we went through that entire interview process, and obviously the result was still kind of the same, where it was decided in the end through the interview process that McBreen was the person to get the job, and in a large part it fell down to, even after the second round of interviews where we had two choices, it was ultimately it was Chief Leitner and myself and even you at the time, where it was, "Hey, who do you want?" That's kind of how it went. But I think moving forward, that there does not need to be an interview process. The fire chief should be selecting who he wants, but to safeguard against not putting someone in there who's not qualified, that's where the caveat is hey, the fire chief can appoint any person to this position who they see fit, but they have to meet these standards. So that, excuse me, so that we know that the person who's going in, it's not just the fire chief's best friend who, "Hey, I want to promote my buddy." It's no, I think this person is going to work best, and yeah, they meet these qualifications. So.
Pause right here. I would encourage both or either of you to question his logic here, and I think this is something we're going to take offline between us.
I would like to take it offline.
Oh, yeah, and this is the whole purpose of this conversation, and I knew that this was going to be.
No, we didn't. We thought you were speaking right.
No, not at all, no. And hey, look, this is why we have committee meetings. I present ideas, you guys come back and say, "Hey, I like it, I don't like it," take it back and fix it.
Any questions you have for him with regard to this right now, before we sit down and talk about it ourselves?
It needs to be taken offline, my questions.
All right. The question I'm asking is,
Okay.
when we do go offline, is there any more information you need from him to enhance our discussion when we do sit down? Just to pick
No.
his brain right now as to why.
Yeah.
No.
No?
Does the deputy fire chief receive any type of additional benefits other than the, I guess, the title? So the mayor just mentioned it wasn't completely apples to apples when you gave the example with mayor and city council. The deputy mayor doesn't receive any higher salary than the other city
So,
council person because
and
they have that title. So that would be the same thing in the fire department? Like, how does that work with job description? Do they have more duties now
Yeah.
because they have the title? Like, how does that work?
yeah, so they obviously have more duties, and one of the reasons I also included it in the current ordinance is because the highest rank you can attain while still being in the collective, by being in the union, is a battalion chief, the rank of battalion chief. Okay, so that's the highest you can go. And a battalion chief is in charge of a platoon. So we have 4 platoons. Any position above battalion chief has to be an appointed position from mayor and council because it's outside the collective bargaining agreement. And again, going back to third-class city code, the same language that applies to a fire chief, that the fire chief is entitled to basically all the same benefits of the CBA would apply to the deputy chief. So in terms of salary, his salary is appropriated during the budget time, and it's commensurate with the position. It is higher of that of a battalion chief, which it should be because they have more responsibilities and it's a higher rank. But and all the other benefits are all the same. We don't, like, I don't get extra anything outside of what the collective bargaining agreement calls for. And it would be the same thing for the deputy chief.
Thank you.
So
Mhm.
that leads me to this question. It seems as though the deputy fire chief is, in a sense, optional, or optional.
It is.
And because of that, and just based on what you just said, it has to be baked into a budget as well. So I just can't see, let's say, an appointment. Let's just follow that scenario. You want to appoint I think what first has to happen is permission to allow for a deputy to even exist if there isn't one currently. So as you said, Riggs came to mayor and council and says, hey, I want to appoint a deputy.
Mhm.
Because at the time, the deputy position wasn't even filled. So are you proposing that the deputy fire chief position is always a budgeted position, whether it's filled or not?
Excuse me. And I want to say that the reason I'm including it here is because if we want to have one, it can be, but if one is not wanted, it doesn't really need to be there. And it also says the fire chief may appoint a deputy chief as needed.
Well, yeah, and that's my point. If you came in February and says, hey, I want to add a deputy chief, and it's not filled and not budgeted for, then you would have to wait for the entire cycle until January.
Oh, yeah. Everything comes down to the budget and what's budgeted for. If I wanted a deputy fire chief and we didn't budget for it, I'm not getting it. So,
So you're not saying let's budget for a deputy fire chief in perpetuity, whether there's one there or not?
no.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's one there, right? We do have
Yes.
a deputy.
We do currently have a deputy. And ideally, we should always have a deputy because even when looking back to single points of failure, if God forbid something were to happen to me tomorrow, who's going to, lead the show? And that's why you want to and same thing why we have a deputy mayor. If mayor's out of town and someone needs to call the shots, we need to have that number 2 position in place. Because again, the highest rank in the collective bargaining agreement is the battalion chief. One battalion chief can't tell another battalion chief what to do because they're the same rank and they're in the same union. So there's really no one to kind of direct them, if that makes sense.
So it does, line 1 says the fire chief may appoint a deputy fire chief as needed. What you just described is that they're always needed.
Yeah, they always are. And I guess when I typed that up, I just gave it the option for the fire chief, but
Well, not so much the fire chief, but as the position itself. What I'm hearing you saying and what you're writing don't quite jive. You're saying as needed, but then you also compared it to deputy mayor. If I'm away, we need somebody to keep the party rolling. So I would assume you would come in here and fight for the fact that position should always be needed, should always be in place.
yeah. And now that
But you're not saying that.
well, you're right. And then now we're having the discussion, you're making me realize that it probably shouldn't be as needed. It should just be the fire chief, will appoint a deputy fire chief.
So we'll discuss this.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
Okay. And the very last section is just reflective of the fire department that we have now. It's a dedicated, full-time career firefighting force. And again, the number of personnel shall be determined by the fire chief with the approval of mayor and council, which is the way that it operates now. And obviously, with what the budget costs, or with what's budgeted.
In a way, I kind of feel like I'm playing with so we're reducing the number of sections, aren't we?
Yes.
From 01 to 14. So which ones are being eliminated? Maybe that's what I need help with. Between 01 and 14.
Basically, they're all being eliminated. And they're being replaced with new 1, 2, 3, and 4.
We still have 5, 6, 7, 8.
And
Oh, these are
and
being,
not-
okay, I get it. Badges, membership, duties. So when this is all said and done, it will go 123.01 through 05,
04.
04. And then the 99 will stand. You want the 99 either? The penalty, injury, violence.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't need a 99 either. So the 99 would be if you don't like the job that I do, you're free to say, hey, take a hike. Yep. Well, no, I mean, even mayor and council, I mean, you just say, hey, you know what, yeah. So,
This is all you came to present today, right?
this is all I have.
Thank you, Parker. Do you have any other questions, comments? We're gonna walk away. As a committee and discuss 123.03. Schedule another meeting. I'm sure you'll have other things that you want to bring forward shortly, or?
No, this, we have 2 more articles that need to be addressed, and that deal with the fire insurance escrow and the disbursement of fire escrow funds that I'm going to be looking to update. I'll be working on them a little bit later in the year, but this, once we complete this article right here, all the ordinances that deal with the fire department will have been addressed. So we'll be kind of up to date there. I do need to meet with the Civil Service Commission so that we can work on getting the current civil service rules and regulations updated. But I also know that 2 of the members on the Civil Service Commission, their term expired at the end of last year, so I think those need to be reappointed. So I think I've been talking to Justin about working on getting that squared away so that we can start moving forward with testing for an eligibility list for firefighters. So
How does someone, because a lot of our firefighters do not come from other fire stations, the ones who live here in Chester. They don't come from volunteer, fire stations where they get the experience, okay, and training and they get certifications and what have you. So what do you do to make sure that those persons who are already working here as paid firefighters get the additional training that they need so that they too could become qualified for the deputy chief or the chief's position?
Yes,
What
and
incentive is there?
an incentive? Well,
And-
two different questions.
Okay.
The first question is the means for firefighters who don't have opportunities otherwhere. The fire department is contracted with Bucks County Community College, and any and every training that they offer is available to every firefighter, from the firefighter that's been there for 20 years to the firefighter that just walked in the door. We also deliver training throughout the year that is available to every member of the fire department. As far as an incentive, I kind of think of it as career development and your, how do I say this? Career advancement. We're in the process of putting in place, because I would like to work with the union to put into place some requirements, not just passing a test, but some certification requirements for our officers to make sure that our officers have the training that's needed to keep firefighters and the civilians safe. As far as incentive, I would say the incentive is the ability to advance up through the ranks. If a firefighter, I'm a brand new firefighter, I walk in, through the door and I say, hey, I want to be the fire chief one day. Well, there's now a clear roadmap that's laid out. Hey, you want to be a lieutenant, you need this. You want to be a captain, you need that. You want to be a battalion chief, you need this.
So you have an upward mobility.
Yet there's
plan.
upward mobility, and that's spelled out. So, and the ability to obtain those certifications, that upward mobility, is done through the community college and the training programs that we receive. That, you want to take the class, I'll sign your application, and that's offered to every member of the department. So,
Is that something that the firefighters pay for on their own?
Nope, the city pays for it. I account it into my budget every year. We sign the contract every year. Yeah. Now, what I will say, though, is that, all right, I'm a brand new firefighter. Councilman Davis is a brand new firefighter. I come in, I just say, hey, you know what? I just want to be a firefighter. I'm good. I don't want to take those classes. I don't have any dreams of being the fire chief. Okay, well, I don't take any classes. Whereas Councilman Davis, he comes in, I want to be the fire chief one day. You know what? I'm going to sign up for this class this year. I'm going to sign up for that class next year. I'm going to take it. And the incentive is he'll work his way up through the ranks, and in 20 years, along with anyone else who had the aspiration to be the fire chief, then that's up to, at that point, mayor and council. You guys look and say, hey, we have all these firefighters. They've all worked their way up through the ranks. They've all attended these certification and trainings. Which one do we think would be best to lead the department? But how do I say that? I'd like to ensure that a skilled, qualified candidate is available for you guys to make the selection. And that's why I also like to say that, let's just say there's no one in the fire department. You guys want to say, hey, there's this fire chief from Upper Darby who did a great job there. Maybe we want to bring him here. Well, let's make sure he meets certain qualifications. So it gives you guys the option of not just choosing from within the fire department to decide who leads it. You can open it up and say, hey, we want to maybe do a nationwide search.
Anything else? All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn? So moved.
Second.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joan.
You're welcome.